Lucas pressed his back against the cold metal of his locker, his breath shallow, his gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. Maybe if he stayed still long enough, if he blended into the hallway walls, they wouldn't notice him today, but they always did. "Hey, iron loser!" Cody's voice cut through the din of slamming lockers and footsteps like a dagger. Flanked by his ever-present shadows, Jake and Tyler, he strutted over with the cocky swagger of someone who thought cruelty was a sport. Cody yanked the arc reactor patch off Lucas's backpack with a single tug. The threads snapped audibly. Lucas didn't flinch. Not anymore. Showing pain only made them meaner. "I bet he thinks he's gonna fly home after school," Jake sneered, slapping Tyler's chest as if he'd made a genius joke. Laughter echoed through the hallway, bouncing off the lockers and low ceilings like a cruel soundtrack. Lucas pulled his hoodie tighter around his face and slipped away, each step an effort not to run. Behind him, the laughter chased him like smoke. He turned the corner and disappeared into the boys' restroom, locking himself in the farthest stall. There in silence, he pulled the patch from his hoodie pocket. It was frayed now, the outline of the arc reactor barely visible. He sat for a while on the closed toilet seat, legs pulled to his chest, trying to breathe through the lump that lived permanently in his throat these days. The patch felt warm in his hands, even though it wasn't. He pressed it against his palm until the threads itched. That afternoon, home was no different. Silence greeted him. His mom was on a double shift. Again. She'd left a sticky note on the counter. "Dinner in fridge. Love you." He microwaved the casserole without tasting it. The kitchen light flickered overhead like it always did when the house felt too quiet. He didn't turn on the TV. Noise didn't help. It just reminded him that he was alone. He sat in the living room staring at a commercial for some car he'd never afford. In the corner, an old picture frame hung crooked. His dad, in an Iron Man t-shirt, lifting Lucas onto his shoulders at Stark Expo 2010. That image had lived in his dreams for years. After dinner, Lucas padded down the hallway into his bedroom. The door clicked shut behind him like a retreat into a different universe. Posters of Iron Man, old and curling at the edges, covered the walls. A replica of the Mark III helmet, cheap plastic but precious to him, sat atop his dresser. On his desk was a small frame photo, the same one from the hallway, but clearer. Him and his dad at the expo. That was the day it all began. His dad had died 6 months later in a traffic accident, the kind that leaves no one to blame and nothing to fix. Since then, Iron Man had become more than a character. He was a bridge back to that day, a lighthouse in the storm. Lucas sat down at his desk, opened a battered notebook, and started sketching armor. Not just Iron Man's, but his own version. A version with dents and scuffs and patches. A suit built not for flight, but for survival. At school, he wore Iron Man shirts under his sweatshirt. He stopped raising his hand in class. When his drawings got destroyed once, he stopped showing them. But at night, he still drew. He imagined blueprints, gadgets, repulsors that pushed away fear. He whispered sometimes at night when he couldn't sleep, "You're not real, I know, but thanks for being real enough for me." Some nights he dreamed of flying. Most nights he dreamed of being seen. Lucas didn't want to be Tony Stark. He just didn't want to be invisible anymore. The week dragged on, each day a blur of muted insults and half-hearted lectures. Teachers didn't notice when Lucas stopped making eye contact. Classmates didn't ask where his bruises came from. The world around him kept spinning, oblivious. But Friday changed everything. It started like any other day. Lucas kept his hood up, head down. He avoided eye contact, hugged the walls, and moved through the halls like a ghost. But in fourth period English, Mr. DeMarco made an announcement. "All right, class," he said with a clap. "Today we're discussing personal heroes. Over the weekend, I want each of you to prepare a short presentation, just 2 minutes, on someone who inspires you. Could be a public figure, a family member, anyone. You'll present on Monday." Lucas froze. The idea of standing in front of everyone made his stomach knot. But when Mr. DeMarco said the word hero, his mind had immediately gone to one name. That night he sat at his desk with the Iron Man helmet in his lap. He stared at it, fingers tracing the scratches, the chipped paint. He thought of the quote he kept on his wall. "Sometimes you gotta run before you can walk." He whispered, "What would you say if you had 2 minutes?" The answer came easier than he expected. He opened his notebook and began writing. By Sunday evening, the paper was folded neatly in his pocket. His hands were less shaky than before. He still didn't want to speak in front of the class, but this time he needed to. Monday morning came fast. Lucas sat through first, second, and third period in a haze. When the bell rang for English, his legs moved before his brain caught up. He took his usual seat at the back. Mr. DeMarco called names alphabetically. Lucas's last name, Reed, meant he'd be near the end. He listened as students gave reports on athletes, activists, even influencers. Some read off their phones. Some made jokes. Most were forgettable. Then, Lucas? He stood slowly, heart hammering in his ears. He walked to the front of the room, unfolded his paper, and cleared his throat. My hero is someone who isn't real, but he helped me survive something that is. The room quieted. He's a man who built himself, piece by piece, after everything was taken from him. He made mistakes. He kept falling, but he never stopped trying to be better. Lucas's voice shook, but he kept going. When I lost my dad, I lost the version of myself that smiled, that raised his hand, that believed people were good. He looked up, scanning the room. No one laughed. Even Cody, who sat at his usual throne in the back, looked like someone had unplugged him. Iron Man helped me remember that even if you're broken, you can still build something strong from the pieces. He folded the paper, nodded once, and walked back to his seat. Silence. Not mockery, not whispers, just stillness. And in the back row, Cody's smirk wavered. It wasn't defeat, but it wasn't the same smirk. Mr. DeMarco cleared his throat. Thank you, Lucas. That was brave. Lucas stared down at his desk, the adrenaline crashing hard. But somewhere beneath it, a small flame flickered. Not confidence, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become it. Something was shifting. Lucas didn't expect the video to go viral. He hadn't even posted it himself. It was Kara, the girl who sat 2 seats over in English, who'd recorded the entire thing. Her hands had trembled by the time Lucas finished speaking, and her quiet gasp was caught in the final second of the clip. That night, she uploaded it to TikTok with the caption, "Iron Man saved more than just the world." Lucas didn't even know about it until the next morning. His phone buzzed nonstop in his backpack, ignored through math, then history. At lunch, he pulled it out and blinked. Over 20,000 notifications. The video was everywhere. Hundreds of comments turned into thousands in hours. Who's cutting onions? This kid's got more heart than most adults. At Robert Downey Jr.? You have to see this. This is why heroes matter. Not all superheroes wear suits. He turned off notifications by noon, but it didn't matter. At home, his name was already being mentioned in local Facebook groups. His neighbor knocked just to say, "I saw the video. You made us proud." By dinner, a cousin in Oregon called. The local news had picked it up. By bedtime, it was on a national site. Boy gives emotional tribute to Iron Man. An unexpected hero emerges in the classroom. Lucas sat on the couch watching a news anchor repeat his words back to him, lips parted in disbelief. When his mom came home and saw the footage, she dropped her purse mid-step. "Lucas, is that you?" He nodded, still barely breathing. She walked across the room and hugged him tight. Really hugged him. Her hand brushed his hair the way she hadn't done since he was little, and his dad was still alive. "You were always brave," she whispered. The next morning, school felt like a different planet. Students didn't bump into him or mutter, "Iron loser," anymore. Some nodded as he passed. Some smiled. Kara gave him a thumbs up and whispered, "You're kind of famous." Even Cody didn't say a word when they crossed paths in the hall. He just looked, like he couldn't decide whether Lucas was the same person or a completely new one. Then during lunch, the intercom buzzed to life. "Lucas, Reed to the front office, please." Confused murmurs followed him as he stood up. In the office, a woman in a dark blazer stood waiting. She had a Marvel Studios badge on her lanyard and the kind of warm smile that said she knew exactly how surreal this moment was. "Hi, Lucas. I'm Julia. I work closely with Mr. Downey. He saw your video, and he'd like to invite you to a Marvel panel next weekend. You'd be his guest." if that's okay with you. Lucas blinked. Wait, Robert Downey Jr.? She nodded, then she handed him an envelope. It was real. Letterhead, signature, everything. That night, Lucas didn't sleep. Not because of fear, not even from excitement, but because, for the first time in years, he felt seen. He sat by his desk with his old notebook and opened to a blank page. He didn't draw Iron Man this time. He drew something else. New armor, unfamiliar shapes, an idea for something all his own. A suit not for Tony Stark, but for someone who'd been bullied, who'd been quiet, who now had something to say. Someone like him. The Marvel panel was set in San Diego, just 5 days later. Lucas had never flown before. When he and his mom arrived at the airport, there was a driver waiting with a sign that read, "Read." The airline tickets were real. The hotel confirmation was real. Everything was real, except it still felt like a dream. On the flight, his mom kept glancing over, her eyes glossy. "You okay?" she whispered. Lucas nodded. "I think so." He didn't sleep much. Not on the plane, not in the hotel. The night before the panel, he lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, replaying the moment in the office over and over again. The envelope, the signature, the words, "He'd be honored to meet you." Morning came too quickly. The Marvel rep knocked at 9 a.m. sharp with a pressed shirt, new shoes, and a lanyard that read, "Special guest." Lucas ran his fingers over the lettering like it might vanish if he blinked. Backstage at the convention center was everything he imagined. Buzzing walkie-talkies, costume fans, cardboard cutouts of every Avenger imaginable. But when he stepped into the private green room, the noise dulled. Everything slowed, because Robert Downey Jr. was standing in the corner. He wore a dark blazer over a gray t-shirt, a quiet ease in the way he leaned against the table. No cameras, no audience, just a man and a boy who once thought he was invisible. Lucas froze. Downey noticed and smiled. "There he is," he said, stepping forward. "The real Iron Man Jr." He extended a fist. Lucas bumped it. "You saw the video?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Downey nodded. "I didn't just see it. I felt it." They talked for 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime. Lucas told him about the classroom, about the helmet, about how Iron Man helped him remember who he was when everything else fell apart. Downey listened, really listened. At one point, he pulled a chair closer and leaned in, elbows on knees. "You know," he said, "people think acting is pretending, but sometimes it's the opposite. It's remembering who you were before the world tried to change you." Lucas felt his throat tighten. Downey handed him a tissue. Then someone called out, "5 minutes to showtime." The panel was set in Hall H, legendary among Marvel fans. A sea of thousands waited on the other side of the curtain. As Downey was fitted with his mic, he looked at Lucas and said, "You're coming on stage with me, right?" Lucas blinked. "Me? Who else?" Downey grinned. When they stepped out, the room exploded in applause. Lights, flashes, music. But none of it mattered as much as the moment Downey raised the mic. "We spend a lot of time talking about superheroes," he said. "Flying suits, cosmic battles, world-ending stakes." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Lucas, who stood at the side of the stage. "But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth in a classroom full of people who don't know your story." The camera panned to Lucas. For a moment, the crowd went quiet. Then applause. Louder than before. It wasn't about a movie star or a billion-dollar franchise. It was about a boy who stood up when it counted. It was about being seen. Lucas smiled. Not the small, guarded smile he wore at school, but a real one. One that stretched past fear. In that moment under the lights, he wasn't Iron Man Jr. He was just Lucas Reed. And that was enough. After the panel, everything blurred. Lucas had shaken hands with actors he'd only ever seen on movie screens. Chris Hemsworth had ruffled his hair. Brie Larson had knelt to his height and whispered, "You're the real hero today." Tom Holland had asked for a selfie with him, but the moment he remembered most didn't involve cameras. It was in a quiet hallway behind the stage. The lights were dimmer there. Downey leaned against a wall, one hand in his blazer pocket, the other resting on Lucas's shoulder. You didn't just make a statement, he said. You shifted the room. Lucas looked up. I didn't know what else to do. Downey nodded. Sometimes the most honest words are the ones we say when we're out of options. Then he paused, pulled something from his pocket, a silver dog tag worn at the edges. My friend wore this, he said. Gave it to me before his last tour. I keep it because it reminds me who I'm living for. He pressed it into Lucas's hand. Find your version of that. Something worth holding on to. Before Lucas could answer, Downey smiled, winked, and walked away. The rest of the trip was magic. A whirlwind of hotel breakfasts, interviews, the buzz of strangers recognizing his name. He and his mom watched themselves on TV one morning in the hotel room. Lucas in a Marvel tee, trying not to cry, his voice cracking as he said, Iron Man helped me feel brave. He couldn't believe it was him, but coming home was something else. The airport gate looked just like it had a week earlier, but everything felt different. His neighborhood was quieter, his room was smaller. The Monday morning school bell rang the same, but Lucas walked differently. He didn't avoid eye contact anymore. His classmates didn't know how to treat him. Some avoided him. Some offered awkward high fives. Even Cody seemed confused, mumbling a vague, hey, before turning away in the hallway. Lucas didn't care. He had stopped needing their approval. Instead, he started a blog. Quietly, anonymously. He called it The Stark Truth. He wrote about courage, about silence, about what it means to stand alone and still not crumble. He shared sketches, heroes that didn't wear capes, stories of small bravery, essays on healing. The blog found readers. One day an anonymous message popped up. My brother never talked to anyone. Then he saw your video. Now he draws too. Another. I'm a teacher. I forgot why I started. Your voice reminded me. Lucas never replied, but he printed those messages out and taped them inside his notebook, the same notebook that once held only Iron Man sketches. Now it held something more. Weeks passed, then months. The world moved on, as it always does. But Lucas didn't stop. He kept writing. He kept drawing. One day during a school assembly about kindness, the principal paused mid-speech and looked toward the second row. Some of you know Lucas Reed, she said, but what you might not know is that one voice, spoken with honesty, can echo longer than 100 shouts. Heads turned. Lucas stayed still. He didn't shrink, didn't look away. He smiled, because he knew something now. Bravery isn't a spotlight moment. It's the quiet decision to keep showing up. And he was just getting started. 6 months later, the world had moved on. The video had long since slipped off trending pages. Other stories had replaced it. Politics, celebrities, new controversies, new distractions. Lucas wasn't the headline anymore. He wasn't the Iron Man kid or the viral sensation. He was just Lucas Reed. But that didn't mean things were the same. At school, his classmates treated him differently. Not in a celebrity way, but in a careful, uncertain way. Like they weren't sure if he remembered who he used to be, and they didn't know which version to talk to. Lucas remembered everything. He still walked the same hallway, past the same trophy case, still sat in the same corner of the cafeteria, still doodled in the margins of his notebooks when lessons dragged. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer flinched when called upon, no longer avoided mirrors, and he no longer tried to make himself smaller. His blog, The Stark Truth, had grown beyond anything he expected. It started with just a few quiet posts. Now it had followers, real ones, from places he'd never heard of. Middle schoolers in Michigan, a guidance counselor in Arizona, a high school poetry club in Oregon that read his essays out loud every Friday. Lucas still didn't reply to comments, but he read every single one. The dog tag Downey gave him hung on a small hook by his desk lamp. Some nights, when the house was silent and the moonlight painted silver lines across his wall, he'd hold it in his palm and repeat Downey's words. Find something worth holding on to. Then one cold January afternoon, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a DM, a real letter, envelope, stamp, handwritten in blue ink. It had no return address. Inside was a single note. You reminded me who I used to be. Taped to it was a photo, a classroom, a young teacher standing in front of a whiteboard, surrounded by middle schoolers. He was smiling nervously, holding a copy of the Stark Truth printout. Lucas stared at the photo for minutes, then handed it to his mom. She cried quietly, hugged him, and whispered, "You're making a difference." 2 weeks later, a school in Pennsylvania invited him to speak. He wasn't sure he could. He wasn't a performer. He wasn't Iron Man. But the principal said, "Your words made our students feel seen. That's more powerful than you know." So he went. It was a small auditorium, nothing like San Diego. No lights, no music, just plastic chairs and a dusty curtain. Lucas stood center stage, palms sweating, heart rattling like loose change in a tin can. But when he started talking, everything slowed. He spoke of silence, of being mocked, of the moment in the principal's office, of Downey, of the dog tag, of choosing to speak even when your voice shakes. He didn't expect applause. He didn't expect what happened next either. As students filed out, one boy, maybe seventh grade, stopped, pulled something from his backpack, and held it out. It was a drawing. Lucas, standing with a notepad in one hand, speaking. A speech bubble rose from his mouth. It read, "I'm still here." Lucas blinked hard. "Did you draw this?" "My sister did," the boy said. "She said you look like someone who doesn't leave." Lucas smiled and tucked the drawing into his notebook. That night back at home, he framed it. Because he was still here. Because in a world that forgets fast, staying matters more than shining. Lucas was 17 when the email came. It arrived quietly like most life-changing things do. Tucked between a spam offer for running shoes and a class schedule update. The subject line read, "Feature invitation, voices that change the conversation." The sender? A senior producer from Sunrise Today, one of the biggest morning shows in the country. They were doing a segment on young people who had shifted public narratives. Someone had nominated Lucas. They wanted him in New York. They wanted to tell his story. They might even surprise him with a guest, someone special. He didn't need to ask who. Lucas stared at the screen for a full 10 minutes. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then finally he typed 3 words. "I'm honored, yes." New York was a blur of motion. The car service picked him up at the airport. The hotel had more pillows than he knew what to do with. A production assistant met him at the lobby with a laminated itinerary and a warm smile. "Everyone's excited you're here," she said. "We've been following your blog for months." Lucas smiled, but a part of him still didn't believe it. The morning of the taping, he sat in a makeup chair while someone powdered his face and asked about his skincare routine. Another person clipped a microphone to his collar. A third handed him a water bottle with his name on the label. Everything felt too polished, too loud, too far from the quiet corners where he used to draw heroes in a battered notebook. And yet, he belonged here, because his story was still his, and it still mattered. The segment began with a montage. Clips from the Comic-Con panel, headlines from the blog, testimonies from teachers and students. Then the host turned toward him. "Lucas Reed," she said, smiling warmly. "You were 13 when the world first heard your voice. Now at 17, millions have read your words. What would you say to that younger version of yourself, the kid who stood up for Iron Man?" Lucas hesitated. He could hear the cameras whirring, feel the pressure of the moment pressing against his ribs. Then he said softly, "Keep showing up. Even when it hurts, especially then." There was a pause, then applause. Not the performative kind, but something quieter, respectful, a ripple of people understanding something they hadn't before. After the cameras stopped rolling, the host walked over. "There's something else," she said, handing him a small envelope. "A viewer wanted you to have this." Lucas waited until he was alone, seated by a terminal window in LaGuardia, sun pouring through the glass. He opened the envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch. It showed a classroom, rows of students, and a girl standing at the front holding a notebook. On the chalkboard behind her were the words, "Be the Echo." On the back of the drawing in neat handwriting, "I still draw, every Friday, because of you. Emma." Lucas closed his eyes. He pictured Emma, older now, maybe 15, still drawing, still believing, still echoing. And he realized something. He had become what Downey was for him, someone who didn't just answer a question, but left behind something that rippled, a reason to keep going. It was a rainy Thursday evening in Los Angeles when the letter arrived. A real letter. Thick cream envelope, hand-addressed, the ink smudged slightly from the drizzle. No logo, no typed return address. Just one word on the back, in careful cursive. Downey. Lucas stared at it for a long moment. He was 19 now, sitting at his tiny desk in the corner of his first apartment, a place with crooked blinds and a leaky faucet, but also his name on the lease and peace in the air. The dog tag still hung beside his lamp, and Emma's drawing was framed above his bookshelf. Hands trembling slightly, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, thick, off-white, embossed in the corner with a small Stark Industries logo. And beneath that, Robert Downey Jr.'s unmistakable handwriting. Lucas, I've done a lot of interviews, sat in many green rooms, answered thousands of questions, but yours? That question at Comic-Con? It cut through everything? You didn't ask for a performance. You asked for honesty, and that stuck with me. That night after I walked off stage, I sat in the dressing room, staring at my own reflection for nearly an hour. No entourage, no noise, just me. And I realized I hadn't really looked at myself in years. Not like that. Your question made me, and it reminded me, I'm not just Iron Man. I'm also the man who crawled through fire to become him. You saw that at 13, and you gave me the chance to be seen. I hope, in some small way, I did the same for you. Keep showing up, kid. The world's loud. Be louder when it counts. And hey, stay weird. The world needs more of that. RDJ. Lucas didn't cry, but he felt something shift, like a weight had finally settled into place. He folded the letter with reverence and placed it beside Emma's sketch inside a double frame. Then for a moment, he sat in silence, letting the sounds of the rain tap gently against the window, as if the world was nodding along. Years passed. Lucas never chased fame. He didn't publish a memoir or launch a speaking tour. He majored in psychology, taught creative writing on the side, kept the blog running quietly. Sometimes he wrote under his name, sometimes he didn't. But the stories always found their way to the people who needed them. In an interview once, college podcast, small listenership, casual tone, the host asked him, "Was there a moment when everything changed?" Lucas thought for a long time, then said simply, "A boy stood up and asked a question, and a man chose to answer it. That was a spark." The host paused. "You were the boy?" Lucas smiled softly. "Sure, but the real story is, neither of us sat back down the same." Years later, on a bookshelf in a dusty corner of a community center in Oakland, a little girl named Annika found a copy of The Stark Truth. It was dog-eared and coffee-stained, wedged between a math textbook and a forgotten play script. She opened it and started reading. 3 hours later, she looked up at her teacher and said, "I want to write something that makes people feel like this." And just like that, the echo continued. Don't forget to drop a like and let us know where you're watching from. Subscribe and stay tuned.